I'm Michael Santos, happy to return with course number 3 on how to become a better investor. And we are continuing with this case study of Michael's Hot Dogs. We divided our corporation into 1,500 shares. We are now going to talk about why would investors go ahead and purchase shares of this corporation. Well, the reality is many investors will get involved in a business because they want to put some money in the idea that this business, that the people who are leading this business are going to increase shareholder value, and that is going to bring a better return on investment for the investor. In the case of Michael's Hot Dogs, I would need to persuade an investor that I could create more value by building this business. Just as you would have to do if you wanted to build a business and raise capital from either selling shares, equity, or raising debt, borrowing money. If the investor who's putting up the working capital would agree with your premise, well, that is the way that you generate the money that you need, and then your job requires you to build a business that can provide the investor with an acceptable return on investment. So if the investor agrees with that premise, then you are effectively going into business. And what I wanted to do was to sell some equity in my corporation, Michael's Hot Dog. So when I structured the corporation, I needed to put together a business plan. The business plan is really almost like a roadmap, right? We spoke earlier about the importance of creating plans. And that's what we are going to do with our business plan for Michael's Hot Dogs. It is going to guide me with how I present investors with the opportunity that I am presenting. They're going to look at the plan, they're going to determine what I am trying to do, and based on the merits of this plan, they're going to make a decision of whether they want to partner with me in buying equity in the business. That business plan becomes the roadmap that guides me through this journey. So in the business plan that I put together for Michael's Hot Dogs, our fictional corporation, I noted that I was going to keep 1,000 shares of the stock, remember these are called shares of stock, for myself. Although I didn't have any money to put up, I did come up with the idea, and I also would accept responsibility for working hard to turn this idea into a business that generates revenues and hopefully profits. We could then use those profits to meet the expenses of the organization, that would be under the gross profit, and generate a net profit that would bring value for all of the shareholders, including me. So if I structured this business with 1,500 shares and I decided to keep 1,000 shares for my own account, that would leave me with 500 shares that I could use to generate working capital, right? I had 1,500 shares. I'm going to keep 1,000 shares for myself, right? And I would then have the remainder of this 1,000 from the 1,500 total shares in the corporation. That leaves 500 shares for investors. That they have equity in the corporation. This is what I kept, right? It's important to recognize these differences. So I keep 1,000, the investors are going to keep 500. I could sell these 500 shares to a group of investors, or to a single investor might purchase all 500 shares. And so for the purposes of this exercise, we are going to just have one investor. Now, although I sold 500 shares, this business doesn't generate a profit overnight. And it's very important for me to let the investors know that I've got a 5-year plan. I've always been on 5-year plans. That's what got me through 26 years in prison, and it's what's gotten me through my first journey back into society. And no different, when I built Michael's Hot Dogs plan, the business plan, I noted that this was going to be a 5-year plan because it's going to take us money and time to turn this into a profitable venture. And later, this business plan that I created would also be very helpful when it came time for me to exit the business or cash out of the business. People are going to rely upon the plan and whether we were able to carry it out, executing the plan, to determine just how much value I created. Because remember, only a share of stock is really only going to be worth what the next investor is willing to pay for it. So for a small startup like Michael's Hot Dogs, I wanted to craft a pitch that the investor could really get behind, showing him the type of return that I expected to build. And to launch the venture, I wasn't going to need a lot of money. I figured in my business plan that I would only need $750. So if I needed a total of $750 to launch this business, I would have to help the investor understand what am I going to do with that $750. And my business plan laid it all out. It would lay out all of the strengths and all of the weaknesses that I expected to have. And I also built a personal profile into the business plan so that I would hope to give the investor some confidence in who I am as an individual. If I could get the investor to believe in me, it would be a lot easier for me to get him to believe in my idea. And so let's say for the purposes of this exercise that I did find an investor who would purchase 500 shares of equity, right? He purchased 500 shares of equity and he purchased them at, let's say he purchased them at $1 a share, okay? So he wrote me a check for $500, and that $500 gave me my first piece of working capital that I could use to build Michael's Hot Dog. That was equity. I came up with the idea, I kept 1,000 shares, he put up the cash, that gave him 500 shares, and together we had 1,500 shares of stock. And what's important to understand is that every share is worth the same amount of money. So immediately when he bought 500 shares at $1 a share, he had 1/3 of the company. I had 1,000 shares, that's 2/3 of the company. Every one of those shares theoretically is worth $1. But by now, you know that a share of stock is only worth what the next person is willing to pay for it. I can tell you at this stage, it would be very unlikely for us to find anybody else to buy us out for $1,500. So effectively, this person may have lost all of his money in the short term the second he wrote the check and acquired those 500 shares. The only way that we could turn that around would be if I turned this $500 into a plan that would help us build a business. In business terms, this total value of my company would be $1,500. That's what it would show on the balance sheet, which we'll get to in a second. But the reality is all I had was $500 in the bank, okay? So we have to recognize that my business plan required me to raise $750, but all I have is $500, so I'm not yet fully funded. I have some options on what am I going to do. It's because I took that $500 and I put it right into the corporate bank account. That is now an asset of the corporation. But I need more assets to get this business off the ground. And that would require me to think about what are my options. Well, one option might be for me to sell additional shares. But I don't want to sell any more of my shares. I only have 1,000 shares and I really believe in the company. So I want to hold on to my 1,000 shares. And I don't want to dilute any of the stock by issuing more than 1,500 shares, because that would just weaken the position of my investor, and it would also make me look like I'm not a very good planner. And I know that ultimately I'm going to be judged on the merits of my plan. Rather than diluting the stock or selling some of my shares, I chose another approach, and that would be to take on debt. Right? We know that debt is borrowing money. It's not going to be me borrowing the money, but rather the corporation is going to borrow money. I need to borrow another $250 by raising debt in Michael's corporation. in Michael's Hot Dogs. And so I needed to go through basically the same process of convincing somebody first to believe in me. And if I could do that, I would have a little bit better shot of getting them to believe into my business idea. And I would need to present that lender with the plan. How am I going to pay that lender back? And in this case, we are going to say that I raised the other $250 in capital through a debt offering of $250. And we're going to do that in the form of a very simple interest-only loan. I wanted to do an interest-only loan to preserve my working capital. So I agreed to the lender that I would pay him a 10% yield on the note. So I would pay him 10% or $25 every year in exchange for the use of this $250. That's how I would start this corporation with working capital. Now I got my total $750. I got $500 from an equity investor. I got $250 from a debt investor. And now I have everything that I need to get going. But I still have to get going. I haven't made any money yet. All I've done is raised equity and debt and formed the corporation, and it's important now for me as the founder of this company to put this business plan into place. And it's important to recognize the difference between equity and debt, which we will get into in one of the later episodes. A lot of people are mistaken in thinking that all debt is bad, but that's not accurate. Debt used wisely is just a tool. I've raised millions of dollars of debt in my own business, and because of that, I've built a substantial net worth. That's what I want you to be thinking about. Understand how business operates, and then try and operate your life as if it is a business. Think about finding equity participants. Think about finding debt participants. Get people to believe in you, and then get them to believe in your idea. And that is how you start to grow a venture that will provide more prosperity for you and your family. What's really important to go before I get into operations of our business is to understand that I haven't made any money yet. I have $750 into the bank, okay? But I haven't done anything yet. That $750 belongs to the corporation. $500 of it is equity, $250 of it is debt. I have to turn this working capital that I put together into a profitable venture. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to reallocate my assets, these $750. And that's what I'm going to cover in the next video. I'm going to cover how I reallocate those assets and how I account for the reallocation of those assets on a balance sheet and on an income statement eventually. So stay tuned for the next episode. I hope that you're finding value in these videos, and if you do, please subscribe to the channel, because I will be providing all types of content that help you become a better investor. My name is Michael Santos, and I want to thank you for